For generations, our stories have been told to us. Our narratives, our identity, our image, they've been oppressed and suppressed. Now is the time for us to take that back. If you want to see changes, be the change. What's up, family? Welcome to Wise Up. My name is christianwisesmith, and it is an honor to be joined for the very first episode by Black History, the first Black elected head prosecutor in the state of Georgia, Mr. Paul Howard Jr. How you doing today, Mr. Howard?
I am doing great, Christian, and it is a real privilege for me to be here today.
Same here, same here. And so here at Wise Up, we have a family tradition. Everybody who comes on the show is family, and we start off with a family photo. So we took that picture this morning, and when you look at this picture, I want to know what comes to mind.
Well, I guess the thing that I thought of the first time I saw it was Maynard Jackson. I worked for Maynard Jackson when I was in law school. He was elected mayor of the city of Atlanta in 1973. I worked for him during the summer of 1974. And even then, he started talking about becoming district attorney in Fulton County. And he talked about doing it for two reasons. And one was the whole matter of policemen shooting black men. But the second thing he talked about was mentoring people in the DA's office, lawyers in the DA's office, so that they could become judges and so that they could leave the office and take leadership positions in our community. So when I saw the picture this morning, I really wanted to say, you see, Maynard, I'm doing what you asked me to do.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. When I look at this picture, I see a couple of things. I see history as well. I see an icon that doesn't get talked about a lot. I think it's incredible that you became the first elected Black head prosecutor in the state of Georgia history. That should be talked about a lot more. And I also see two men coming together from different generations to work for the common good. And I think it's important for people to know that we didn't see eye to eye all the time. I had personal beef with you, and I actually ran against you and tried to take your job. And after that race and that election, you and I sat down together and we spoke one-on-one, and we were able to put our differences to the side for the sake of social justice, trying to end police brutality. And I want everybody watching this to know that one of the things I think that keeps us behind in the Black community is that we don't put our differences to the side to come together. And we have this gap between your generation and my generation. And hopefully after people see this show, they'll see that and they'll recognize that they can work together with our leaders and folks who paved the way from us so that we can have a better future.
Well, Christian, I think that is so important because it is ironic that the older generation, the people in my generation, the people in your generation, we're still fighting for the same thing. You know, just last week, we eulogized and buried John Lewis. You look back at John Lewis's history. He spoke with Dr. King at the March on Washington back in 1963. And both he and Dr. King were talking about police brutality.
Yes, sir.
John Lewis, in his letter that was published on the day of his death, he referenced Rayshard Brooks. He was still talking about police brutality.
He was still fighting.
So our generations we have got a common characteristic. And I think what you said is so important. We have to put aside some of the cosmetic things that people tend to talk about, the music you listen to. We have to put those things aside because we've got some more serious problems that it's important for us to sit down and begin to talk about and work through together.
Absolutely. So growing up in the Jim Crow South, tell us what that experience was like.
Well, Christian, what I grew up is in an atmosphere where everybody said no to me. We had a less than adequate school system. We actually stopped going to school after the 8th grade. So when you got to the 8th grade, the expectation was if you were a guy, you get a job. If you were a woman, you get married.
So there was no high school?
No high school in my community.
Wow.
We had to get on a bus and ride 23 miles to Waynesboro, Georgia, to extend our educations.
Wow.
So it wasn't strange for me that more than half of my classmates, after the 8th grade, they received no other education. We lived in a totally segregated community. And what I always remember is we came along in a generation that involved the Emmett Till death.
Yeah.
So this is what I would hear from all of my relatives and the grown-ups is that you got to be careful. Don't say anything to white people. People say, don't even look at them, because we all lived with the fear of the KKK, the fear of Emmett Till. And so when I said to people when I was 14 that I wanted to be a prosecutor and I wanted to be a lawyer, people just thought that was crazy. You couldn't do it because everything in our community to Black children said, no, you can't do it.
So you went to college, Morehouse, at 16, right?
Started when I was actually 15.
15, okay.
And but while I was there, I turned 16. I was lucky enough to get an early admission scholarship to Morehouse. And I have to say that was one of the most profound things that happened to me. I wouldn't be sitting here if it had not been for Morehouse and being there with all those students and Dr. Gloucester, that was his first year after Benjamin Mays had been the president so long. But Morehouse really changed my life because for the first time, I had somebody to say yes to me, that you can do it. And that was so important to me at that time.
So I can remember my law school experience not having that many Black students, but I know it was nothing like your law school experience. So how do you go from Midfield, Georgia, to Morehouse at 15 to law school? What was that experience like?
Well, let me tell you, when I started law school at Emory, we had 7 Black law students.
7.
And the faculty and the students at Emory, they wanted to make it very clear to me that we didn't want you there. So my first day at Emory's law school, we had a discussion about an award called the Amjur Award. And one of the Black students raised her hand and asked, what is that award for? One of the white students said to her, well, listen, you don't have to worry about that award because that's awarded to the best student at the school. That's how I started my experience at Emory. And we had some professors who actually used insensitive racial terms in class. We did not get called upon to answer questions. So I was appreciative of the academic rigors of the school.
Right.
But brother, let me tell you, I was glad to leave Emory and get out and move on.
So as a prosecutor, part of your job is holding people responsible for committing illegal acts. And that could be sending people to prison. It could be sending them to programs. What exactly does a prosecutor do? I found myself when I ran for Fulton County DA explaining to people what a prosecutor does. You've been a prosecutor here for 23 years. And I want to hear in your words, what does your job mean, not only to you, but for the community?
So I looked at my job in 2 ways. Number one, what prosecutors do is to help victims of crime. So if there's somebody in our community who's hurt, who's injured by crime, my job was, first of all, to help that victim, and secondly, to hold the person who committed that crime responsible. And particularly what I try to do as a prosecutor is to make sure that that person doesn't get out and harm somebody else in the community needlessly. We created a second prong for prosecutors. I'm not aware of any other prosecutors who created this prong.
In the country?
In the country,
okay.
Because this prong was to keep our community safer by developing crime prevention problems. I think that's really key because, sometimes I see other prosecutors talk about just putting people in jail.
Right.
That's not really the key. The key is keeping your community safer, which means you might have to do other things. And that's what we try to focus upon, those other things, and not just putting folks in jail.
So Fulton County encompasses Atlanta, and Atlanta is known throughout the country as a place for Black excellence. And so with Atlanta being in Fulton County, a large percentage of the crimes that come through your office are Black people. So I want to know from you, from the first Black prosecutor in Georgia history, what are some things that folks in the Black community can do to break away from the system so that they never have to come into contact with your office?
Well, that's a question people ask me all the time. Mr. Howe, what can we do to prevent crime? Well, this is the word I use. I usually use one word to describe a whole system, and I'll say college. And the reason I say college is because in our criminal justice system, very seldom do you see someone who is a college graduate in court for the commission of a crime. But what I'm really talking about is education. Education still remains critical for our community, because what you find is, Christian, that most of the young Black men that we see, and that's the majority of the criminal defendants, they are not there because they are evil or they've got some genetic tendency to commit crime,
Right.
but they make bad decisions at a certain point in their lives. And so much of that decision-making process has to do with not knowing, lack of education, lack of exposure. So I think that that's critical for still for the people in our community. It is sad. That was the theme when John Lewis and Dr. King were working in civil rights, and we're still talking about the same thing, is getting our community more education and more opportunities for our communities.
Growing up for me, I saw my mom, my grandmother, pretty much every family member commit crimes, and it was to survive. And it's been my experience and a lot of people in the Black community where crimes are committed because of, like you said, the lack of education and poverty.
Right.
So is there a way that the DA's office, that you can partner with education programs or school systems or anything, any community resource provider to help people get the things that they need so that they won't come your way?
Right. Well, I believe that the DA, in my opinion, has to be different.
Yeah.
And Christian, you might not know this, I've actually had other elected officials and other DAs to ask me, why are you doing this project? They'd say, you don't have to do that. Man, why are you doing that? Yeah. But I believe you have to do it because it doesn't make any sense when you can see what is causing the problem to ignore that and simply prosecute people for some symptom of the problem. What you talked about is people attempting to survive. You know that already. I think what the DA has to do is to use his staff, to use his position of authority in the community to say to the community, hey guys, we got to do something before people get here so we can make sure that this process of just producing inmates and defendants for the system doesn't keep happening.
Yes, sir. Now let's switch gears and talk about police brutality for a second. Most people want to address the police. You hear defund the police,
right.
You hear police reform. You don't hear many people talk about addressing prosecutors.
Right.
You are the leading prosecutor in the country when it comes to prosecuting bad police officers. Tell us how you got there and tell us what other prosecutors can do to follow in your footsteps to help change our justice system.
Well, I wish I could take full credit for the whole thought process. But again, I have to go back to Maynard Jackson. He talked to me over and over again about the 20 or so young Black men that were killed every year by the Atlanta Police Department. He said to me, Paul, if we get a Black DA, he says the Black DA can turn that around. Because once the police understand that you're going to prosecute them if they kill a Black person, he says, I believe that you can greatly reduce it or you can stop it. And I'm gonna tell you, he was right, because when I started, there wasn't anything unusual to see 15 or 20 young Black men being killed by the police. Now the number is down to about 3 a year. That is still too many.
15 to 20 a year?
A year. And so now we're down to about 3. We can get better, but the person, I believe, who is the gatekeeper of that process is the DAs.
Absolutely.
And the DAs have not stepped up. They've not taken responsibility. Even with the organization that I was the president of, it's the Association of Prosecutors. It's a nationwide organization. One of the other DAs and myself, Kim Worthy from Detroit, we tried to get the DAs to apologize to the country and to actually set out some policy and statutory changes. Our own organization refused to do it. They would not take responsibility for what we've done. And it is a shame when you consider that the DA in Fulton County is the leading DA for prosecuting police for killing citizens. When you consider, like, for instance, in Los Angeles, since 2000, they've had over 1,800 shootings, far many more than in Fulton County.
By police officers?
By police
against
officers.
Civilians?
Against civilians.
Or is that whole number the black community?
No, that's against civilians.
Okay.
But out of that 1,800, Christian, they hadn't had one of them, one prosecuted.
So it was 1,800 nothing.
And zero.
Wow. Okay.
And that's what we see all around the country. In fact, Christian, today, that's why the people in Louisville, Kentucky are sitting around trying to get some justice for Breonna Taylor. And not one of those policemen to this point has been arrested. And that goes on all around the country. And so that's why we're trying to alert people to the importance of that issue in our upcoming election.
Man. So Ahmaud Arbery was killed down in Brunswick, Georgia. Right. And in my opinion, the DA down there, Jackie Johnson, tainted that case. She screwed it up. She fumbled. She dropped the ball.
Right.
And I remember when I was running for DA, I thought to myself, first I'm a black man, and then I see this woman who would potentially be my colleague screw this case up and completely do Mr. Arbery injustice. She is your colleague. You are the standing DA.
Right.
What are your thoughts on how she handled that case?
Well, Christian, as you recall, it wasn't just one DA.
Yeah.
There were 3 DAs who fumbled the ball.
Right.
And even though the evidence was clear that they shot Mr. Arbery down in the street for just being, I guess, a black man walking or jogging, they did nothing about it. But the thing that I want people to understand, it's not just that case, but these guys who shot Mr. Arbery were former and current law enforcement officials. I think it had a lot to do with it. And every week, what we hear in Georgia is, there's been another police shooting.
Yep.
But Christian, what we don't hear is that the DA has moved to do something about it. And that's what we've got to change.
And I appreciate what you've been doing to keep police officers accountable, and I hope that more DAs follow your lead on that. So we're going to jump to another segment we call the lightning round here at Wise Up. So I'm going to throw a word or a phrase at you, and I want you to just fire off the first thought that comes to mind. You cool with that?
I'm cool with that.
All right, ready?
I guess I'm ready.
Fonnie Willis.
I thought I was ready, but I'd say misguided, unprepared, put together a whole campaign based upon an attack upon me rather than preparing something for the community.
Mary Norwood.
Republican, values are inconsistent with the values of the people in our community, bad for Fulton County.
Donald Trump.
A disgrace. I can't wait for him to get out of office. Ought to encourage everybody to vote and keep voting.
18-year-old Paul Howard Jr.
Scared, looking for a way to fit in, but always focused upon the goal.
Breonna Taylor.
Who brings, say, chills. Chills because we're always told, if you stay off the street jogging, something won't happen to you. If we're told if you don't resist, something won't happen to you, like George Floyd. If you run, like Rayshard Brooks, you still get shot.
Yeah.
But I get chills when I think about Breonna Taylor because, Christian, she was in her own house, minding her own business.
Yeah. C.T. Vivian.
A lion, man, a giant, somebody that we will miss. And what I always appreciated about him, even in the hottest fire, he was always cool and smiling.
John Lewis.
Man, I'm thinking at the right hand of God. I mean, I think he's sitting there, what a man of gracious, true grit. I always call him Superman, and I guess God called Superman home.
Yes, sir. Last one, Christian Wisesmith.
I think Christian Smith, a lot of promise. Got a lot of good things in his future. All he's got to do is just stick to his guns. And I think not only our city, but our country is going to be hearing a lot about Christian Smith.
Right on. Appreciate that. All right. So here at Wise Up, our mission is to educate, elevate, and motivate people so that we can change the world one day at a time. So you have been in a political space for 30 years. Is that right? Somewhere close?
27 years.
27.
Yeah.
So what I would like for you to do is educate everybody on a very basic level of just tell people, what is politics? What does it mean? How does somebody jump into it? And what is the foundation of politics? Because a lot of times the Black community gets left behind or left out or overlooked because we don't understand the political process.
Right. Well, politics, what it involves is guiding the activities of your life. And that's what people got to understand. Somebody is deciding how you can live your life.
Exactly.
How fast you can drive your car,
Yep.
whether or not you stop at the stop sign or not. If you don't stop, is there a fine or do you go to jail? It's all decided by politics. I remember the words of Kwame Nkrumah, because what Nkrumah said, enter first into the political realm, and then all things will follow afterwards. And that's what we've got to understand, that politics is ultra important. So when you don't vote, even though you think you aren't doing anything, what you're doing is you're giving in to somebody else's politics. Might be Donald Trump's politics, might be Mary Norwood's politics, might be the Atlanta Police Union politics. Yeah. So that's why it is so important that we have to show our political muscle, our politics, by voting.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So I got to tell you, thank you for taking the time to be here today. This is something that I hope people can watch years from now, and they can look at you as being a trailblazer, because you are the first elected Black head prosecutor in Georgia history. That's a big deal. But you also have an election coming up next week on August 11th. I'll let you close us out and give some last words and tell people why they need to vote you back in to keep being our district attorney here in Fulton County.
Well, I ask people to help me get back in office because we've got a big job to do with the new challenge in our community, the police brutality. We got to bring it into it, but you got to have somebody who's accustomed to making big changes, somebody who's experienced enough to do that, somebody who's actually developed and operated a program. So that's why I ask people to put me back in office, and I ask people to remember, and I know it's a runoff and people say, well, my vote's not important. Remember, Keisha Bottoms was elected mayor by less than 800 votes.
That's right.
Every vote is important. Every vote matters. And I'm urging people to come out and vote, come early, and be prepared to stand in line all day, because we don't know what kind of Republican tricks are going to happen on August 11th. But whatever the trick, we ought to stand in line and make sure our vote counts.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Well, you have my vote. And thank you again for joining us today here at Wise Up and educating our people, motivating our people, and inspiring our people to know that they can be a trailblazer just like you are. And thank you for paving the way for folks like myself who came after you. So Paul Howard Jr., August 11th, vote for Paul Howard Jr. to remain our Fulton County District Attorney. We have a lot of work to do to change our justice system, to make sure that Black people finally secure the equality and the justice that we've been fighting generations for. Paul Howard is our guy to do it. And if you watch this show years from now, remember, this guy paved the way for folks like myself, like you, being the first elected district attorney in Georgia history. And you out there might be the next first elected something wherever you live. So Mr. Howard, thank you, man. It's been an honor.
Okay.
Appreciate you.
All right.
All right.